In the forgotten depths of a cave on Ruusan, 100 Sith Lords stand in perfect formation, their crimson lightsabers casting dancing shadows across ancient stone. Lord Korriban raises his arms, and the air itself begins to scream. Above them, a Jedi army charges through burning forests, sensing something terrible building in the darkness below. The ground trembles. Reality bends, and in that single moment, the most powerful Sith organization ever assembled makes a choice that will reshape the galaxy forever. But this is not where our story begins. Long before that fateful day, long before the thought bomb's crimson light consumed 200 Force users in one terrible instant, there was a question that haunted the Sith across millennia. Can beings of absolute ambition ever truly unite? Can those who crave supreme power ever share it? The Brotherhood of the Sith rose to answer that question. They built armies that shook the Republic. They commanded fleets that darkened 1,000 skies. They came closer to galactic domination than any Sith before or since. And then, in a single heartbeat, they were gone. Tonight we journey through 7,000 years of darkness to understand how the galaxy's greatest Sith empire destroyed itself. From the red sands of ancient Korriban to the scarred valleys of Ruusan, from the first Dark Lords to the architect of their annihilation, this is the complete chronicle of the Brotherhood's rise and catastrophic fall. Hey everyone. I know 71% of you watching right now haven't subscribed yet, and I'd genuinely appreciate it if you could help this channel grow by hitting that subscribe button. Also, drop a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. I always love seeing our global community come together. Now get comfortable, dim those lights, settle into your blanket, and let's journey together into the ancient darkness of the Sith. Our story begins 7,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, in an era when the Republic was young and the Jedi Order had only recently established itself as guardians of peace. But peace, as always, bred conflict. The event known as the First Great Schism tore through the Jedi Order like lightning through a clear sky. 100 Jedi, perhaps the most powerful Force users of their generation, rejected the Order's teachings. They believed the Force had a dark side that should not be feared but embraced. They saw power not as a responsibility but as a right. When words failed, lightsabers ignited, and the halls of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant ran red with blood. The war was brief but brutal. The Darksiders, despite their power, were outnumbered, defeated. They were exiled from Republic space, cast out into the unknown regions with a single command: never return. Their ships, battered and broken, limped through hyperspace seeking refuge, seeking a place where they might rebuild their strength and one day return to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. They found Korriban. The planet emerged from hyperspace like a wound in reality. Red sands stretched beneath crimson skies. Massive statues of forgotten kings loomed over valleys carved by ancient hands. And there, among the tombs and temples, lived the Sith species, a civilization of red-skinned, Force-sensitive beings whose culture had been built upon strength, conquest, and dark side ritual for thousands of years. When the Dark Jedi descended from the stars, the Sith species saw gods. The exiles possessed powers beyond anything the native Sith had witnessed. They could choke life from a distance, summon lightning from their fingertips, and bend minds to their will with merely a thought. The Dark Jedi, recognizing an opportunity that exceeded their wildest ambitions, proclaimed themselves the new rulers. They became the first Sith Lords, taking the species' name as their title and their legacy. Under Dark Jedi rule, the Sith species became the foundation of an empire. Ijun, leader of the exiles, crowned himself the first Dark Lord of the Sith. Tulak Hord rose to become the greatest lightsaber duelist the galaxy had ever seen, his blade technique so perfect that even millennia later, Sith apprentices would study recordings of his battles. and Marka Ragnos, who would rule for over a century, unified the squabbling Sith Lords into something resembling order. The Valley of the Dark Lords was carved into Korriban's rock, massive tombs housing the remains of Sith royalty. Each tomb was a temple, each temple a nexus of dark-side power. The Sith Code emerged during these centuries, its words crystallizing the philosophy that would guide Darksiders for thousands of years to come. Peace is a lie. There is only passion. Through passion I gain strength. Through strength I gain power. Through power I gain victory. Through victory my chains are broken. The Force shall free me. But even in those early days, a pattern emerged. Power attracted rivals. Strength invited challenge, and the dark side, which promised freedom, always demanded blood. For 500 years, the Sith Empire expanded across the stars like a dark tide. World after world fell to their fleets. Species after species learned to kneel before red-bladed lightsabers. The ancient Sith built academies where Force-sensitive children were trained in arts the Jedi would consider abominations. They mastered Sith alchemy, transforming living creatures into monsters of war. They created holocrons, pyramidal devices that stored the knowledge and essence of the greatest Dark Lords, ensuring their wisdom would survive death itself. But immortality in spirit meant nothing if the body could not hold power, and power among the Sith was never freely given. It had to be taken. When Marka Ragnos finally died after his century-long reign, two Sith Lords stood ready to claim his throne. Naga Sado believed the Empire's destiny lay in conquest, in spreading Sith dominion across every corner of the galaxy. Ludo Kresh preached consolidation, arguing that expanding too quickly would expose them to enemies they were not prepared to face. Both were brilliant, both were ruthless, and both refused to bend the knee. Their rivalry erupted at Ragnos's funeral. As Sith Lords gathered in the Valley of the Dark Lords to honor their fallen master, Sado and Kresh drew lightsabers over his still warm corpse. The duel was interrupted by something impossible. The spirit of Marka Ragnos himself rose from his tomb, his ghostly form towering over the assembled lords. He declared that the Sith's greatest test was yet to come, that the strong would rise and the weak would be ashes. Then he faded, leaving behind two Sith Lords convinced that prophecy spoke of their personal triumph. Before either could strike the killing blow against the other, fate intervened in the form of two hyperspace explorers who had no idea they were about to ignite a galactic war. Gav and Jory Daragon were siblings, young and ambitious, searching for new hyperspace routes that might make their fortune. When their navicomputer malfunctioned, they emerged from hyperspace directly above Korriban. The Sith had remained hidden from the Republic for 1,000 years. Now, in one unlucky moment, that secrecy was shattered. Naga Sado saw opportunity where others saw disaster. He welcomed the explorers publicly, while secretly planning to use them as pawns. He staged an attack on Korriban, framing Ludo Kresh as a traitor working with the Republic, then positioned himself as the Empire's defender. When Kresh fled, wounded and disgraced, Sado claimed the title of Dark Lord and did exactly what he had always intended. He prepared for war. Using the Daragon siblings' route back to Republic space, Sado launched the largest Sith invasion the galaxy had ever witnessed. His fleet emerged from hyperspace above Coruscant itself, the Republic capital world. Massassi warriors, bred and mutated through Sith alchemy into towering monsters, descended on cities that had known peace for generations. Sith meditation spheres amplified the dark side, allowing Sado to create illusions that made his fleet appear 10 times larger than reality. The Republic, caught completely unprepared, reeled under the assault. Planets fell in days. The Jedi Order, smaller and less militant than it would later become, struggled to mount an effective defense. Battles raged across Coruscant, Corus Major, and Kurik. Entire star systems burned. For weeks it seemed the Sith would achieve what they had dreamed of for a millennium, total domination of the known galaxy. But Sado had made one critical miscalculation. He had assumed Ludo Kresh was truly defeated. Kresh returned at the worst possible moment, his own fleet striking Sado's forces from behind, just as Republic defenders began organizing their counterattack. The Sith Armada, caught between two enemies, shattered. Sado, desperate and cornered, unleashed weapons that went beyond warfare into cosmic atrocity. He used ancient Sith technology to destabilize stars, causing supernovas that destroyed entire systems, both Sith and Republic alike, simply to cover his retreat. The price was catastrophic. Millions died in the stellar explosions. The Republic, horrified by what the Sith were willing to do, pursued Sado's fleeing forces with unprecedented fury. Jedi led fleets directly to Korriban itself. They bombarded the ancient Sith worlds, reducing temples to rubble and academies to ash. The Valley of the Dark Lords was shattered by orbital strikes. Ziost, the Empire's administrative capital, fell silent as its cities burned. Naga Sado escaped with a handful of followers to Yavin 4, a jungle moon where he would use the last of his strength to transform the primitive Masasi into his eternal guardians before entering a suspended animation that would last 4,000 years. Ludo Kresh died in the final battle above Korriban, his ship torn apart by Republic missiles. The Sith Empire was annihilated. Their worlds lay in ruins. Their fleets were destroyed. Their greatest lords were dead or in hiding. The Republic declared victory, and the Jedi Order assured the galaxy that the Sith were extinct, that the threat had been permanently eliminated. But holocrons remained hidden in collapsed tombs. Knowledge survived in secret vaults buried beneath radioactive rubble, and the dark side of the Force, which cared nothing for politics or war, continued to call to those who would listen. The Sith were not extinct. They were simply learning a lesson that would take thousands more years and countless more corpses to fully understand. Power attracts rivals. Empires built on conquest inevitably face stronger conquerors, and the greatest threat to the Sith had never been the Jedi. It had always been themselves. In the centuries that followed, the galaxy entered what historians would call the Golden Age of the Republic. Without the Sith threat, civilization flourished. Art and science reached new heights. The Jedi became peacekeepers rather than warriors. Children grew up, never knowing the fear of Sith invasions. But in the darkest corners of space, in tombs that sensors could not penetrate and ruins that explorers avoided, something waited. The dark side is patient, and its servants, though scattered and broken, remembered everything. 400 years passed. The scars of the Great Hyperspace War faded from living memory into legend, from legend into myth. Korriban became a forbidden world, marked on star charts with warnings that few bothered to read. The Jedi grew complacent, as victors often do. They had defeated the Sith so completely that the threat seemed as distant and impossible as a star going dark. This was precisely when the dark side chose to return. His name was Freedon Nad, and he had been one of the Jedi Order's most promising students. Powerful in the Force, brilliant in combat, he possessed every quality a Jedi Master could hope for, every quality except patience. Nad believed he had surpassed his teacher, that he deserved elevation to Jedi Knight immediately. When the Council denied him, explaining that mastery required wisdom as much as strength, something inside him broke. He left the Order in anger, stealing a starship and disappearing into the Outer Rim. Rumors guided him, whispers of ancient power sleeping on forgotten worlds. Eventually, those whispers led him to Yavin 4. The jungle moon had remained untouched since Naga Sado's exile. The Masasi, transformed by Sith alchemy into hulking warriors, still guarded their master's temple. They should have killed Nad, the moment he landed. Instead, they knelt. Something in him called to their genetic memory, some echo of the dark side power that had created them. Deep within the temple, Freedon Nad found what every Sith Lord ultimately discovers: power has a price, and that price is always yourself. Naga Sado's spirit, preserved through Sith sorcery, waited in the shadows. The ancient Dark Lord taught Nad everything. Lightsaber techniques that had been forbidden for 1,000 years, alchemical processes that could twist flesh and bone into new configurations, and most importantly, the fundamental truth that the Jedi refused to acknowledge. The Force had no light or dark, only strength and weakness, only power and those too afraid to claim it. When Freedon Nad emerged from that temple, the promising Jedi student was gone. In his place stood a Sith Lord. He conquered Onderon, a world whose culture was already steeped in darkness and violence. The Beast Riders who ruled the planet's wilderness had warred with the city dwellers for generations. Nad ended that war by becoming its undisputed victor. He ruled Onderon for decades, establishing a dynasty that would worship him long after death. When his mortal body finally failed, his spirit remained, bound to his tomb through the same techniques Sado had taught him. The dark side had proven something the Jedi desperately wanted to deny. You could not kill it by destroying its servants. The knowledge persisted, the hunger remained, and there would always be someone brilliant enough, ambitious enough, arrogant enough to seek it out. 300 years after Freedon Nad's death, his teachings found new students. Satel and Alima Keto were aristocrats from the Empress Teta system, bored heirs to a peaceful kingdom who discovered Sith artifacts in their family's museum. What began as curiosity became obsession. They founded the Krath, a secret society dedicated to exploring the dark side. Their movement spread among the wealthy elite, corrupting an entire generation of Teta's nobility with promises of power beyond their privileged lives. The crisis' rise culminated in a coup. They murdered the system's leaders, including their own parents, and seized control. When the Republic sent Jedi to investigate, they found Force users whose abilities were raw and untrained but fueled by something the Jedi had not encountered in centuries: pure, undiluted hatred. But the Krath were amateurs playing with forces they barely understood. The true threat was still coming. Exar Kun had been everything the Jedi Order represented: talented, dedicated, destined for greatness. His master Vodosiask Bas recognized both Kun's potential and the darkness that lurked within it. He tried to guide his student toward humility, toward understanding that strength without wisdom was just another form of weakness. Kun heard only criticism. When he discovered ancient Sith texts in the Jedi archives, texts kept as historical warnings, he saw them as proof that the Order was hiding the truth. The Jedi feared the dark side not because it was evil, but because it was powerful, and they wanted to monopolize the Force for themselves. His fall was not a single moment but a series of choices, each one seeming reasonable at the time. He traveled to Onderon to study Freedon Nad's tomb. Just to understand the enemy, he told himself. He allowed Nad's spirit to teach him. Just to learn how the Sith thought, he rationalized. He journeyed to Korriban and survived trials in the tombs of ancient Dark Lords. Just to prove he was strong enough to resist temptation, he believed. By the time Exar Kun stood in the throne room of Naga Sado's spirit on Yavin 4, there was nothing left of the Jedi he had been. The dark side had not conquered him through force. It had simply agreed with everything he already wanted to believe about himself. Meanwhile, another Jedi was falling through an entirely different path. Ulic Qel-Droma had volunteered to infiltrate the Krath, to destroy them from within. He believed his commitment to the light side was unshakable, that he could walk among dark-siders without being touched by their corruption. It was the arrogance of a man who had never truly been tested. Alima Keto saw through his deception immediately but chose to seduce rather than expose him. Day by day she drew him deeper into Krath's rituals. Week by week she showed him how the dark side could be justified as necessary, as pragmatic, as simply being realistic about how power worked in the galaxy. When Ulic finally embraced the darkness, he convinced himself he was still serving the light, that he would use this power to destroy the Sith from within. By then, he was too deep to see the truth. He had become what he hunted. Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma met as rivals and recognized themselves in each other. Two fallen Jedi, both brilliant, both powerful, both absolutely convinced of their own righteousness. The spirit of Marka Ragnos appeared to them both, just as he had appeared to Sado and Kresh 4,000 years earlier. He declared them Sith Lords and tasked them with the galaxy's conquest. Unlike their predecessors, Kun and Qel-Droma chose unity over rivalry. Together they would succeed where solo Dark Lords had failed. They began recruiting. Fallen Jedi flocked to their banner. Dozens who had harbored secret doubts about the Order's restrictions. Darkside adepts emerged from hiding, sensing that the ancient powers were rising again. Even the Mandalorians, the galaxy's greatest warriors, allied with the new Sith, lured by promises of glorious war. What Exar Kun created was not an empire in the traditional sense. It was a brotherhood, the first true brotherhood of the Sith, united by shared purpose rather than forced submission, bound by loyalty to each other rather than fear of a single Dark Lord. For a brief, terrible moment, it seemed this approach might actually work. The Great Sith War erupted across the galaxy with shocking speed. Kun's forces struck at Jedi temples, stealing holocrons and murdering masters in their own halls. The attack on Ossus was particularly devastating. The ancient Jedi world housed libraries containing thousands of years of accumulated knowledge. Kun's Brotherhood burned it all. Jedi scrambled to save what texts they could, while Sith warriors cut them down in the archives they had spent lifetimes protecting. Ulic Qel-Droma led fleets that shattered Republic defenses. His tactical genius, honed through years of Jedi training, now served the dark side with terrifying efficiency. Planets fell not through overwhelming force, but through perfectly executed strategy. The Republic teetered on the edge of collapse. The Jedi Order was in chaos, its own former members now leading armies against them. Victory seemed inevitable for the Brotherhood. Then Ulic killed his own brother. Qel-Droma had come to save Ulic, to pull him back from the darkness. In the duel that followed, Ulic struck his brother down. As Keki died in his arms, the Jedi Nomi Sunrider, who had loved them both, did something that had never been attempted. She reached into the Force and severed Ulic's connection to it. In one instant, Ulic Qel-Droma went from one of the most powerful Force users in the galaxy to nothing. The sudden absence shattered him more completely than any defeat in battle could have. Broken and repentant, he betrayed Exar Kun's location to the Republic. The final battle came to Yavin 4. Republic fleets and Jedi strike teams converged on Kun's temple fortress. The Dark Lord, cornered and desperate, attempted a ritual that would free his spirit from his body, allowing him to survive death itself as the ancient Sith Lords had. The ritual succeeded, but not in the way Kun intended. His spirit was trapped in the temples, unable to move on, unable to return to physical form. For 4,000 years, he would remain there, screaming silently into the Force, a prisoner of his own immortality. The Brotherhood was destroyed. Its members were hunted down across the galaxy. The Mandalorian alliance collapsed. Once again, the Republic declared victory over the Sith. Once again, the Jedi assured everyone that the threat was eliminated. But something had changed. The Brotherhood had proven that Sith could work together, even if only temporarily. They had shown that unity, however fragile, multiplied their strength exponentially. The lesson was written in blood across a dozen star systems. Someone, somewhere, was taking notes. 37 years after Exar Kun's defeat, the Mandalorians returned. They swept through the Outer Rim like a plague, their Neo-Crusader armies conquering world after world. The Republic hesitated, paralyzed by bureaucracy and fearful of repeating the mistakes that had led to previous wars. The Jedi Council debated endlessly, searching for a peaceful solution, even as the body count climbed into the millions. Two young Jedi Knights, watching the slaughter from afar, decided they had seen enough of patience and wisdom. Revan and Malak had been friends since childhood, brothers in all but blood. Both were prodigies, gifted with abilities that suggested they might one day join the ranks of the greatest Jedi Masters. Both were also frustrated by what they saw as the Order's cowardice. The Jedi had the power to stop the Mandalorians. They simply lacked the will. Against the Council's explicit orders, Revan and Malak led a splinter faction of Jedi into the war. They called themselves Revanchists, believers in justice through action rather than meditation. Thousands of young Jedi followed them, convinced that defending the helpless was more important than obeying cautious elders. At first, it seemed the Council's fears were unfounded. Revan proved to be a tactical genius. He studied Mandalorian culture, learned their language, understood their honor codes. He did not just defeat them in battle, he dismantled their entire philosophy of conquest. The war turned. Republic forces, bolstered by Jedi leadership, pushed the Mandalorians back system by system. The final confrontation came at Malachor V. What happened there remains classified in Republic records, hidden behind redactions and missing files. What is known is this: Revan activated a superweapon called the Mass Shadow Generator. The device created a gravitational anomaly so powerful it crushed both the Mandalorian fleet and a significant portion of Revan's own forces. Hundreds of ships were pulled from orbit and smashed together. Thousands of Jedi died instantly. The planet itself was nearly torn apart, transformed into a wound in the Force that would scream silently for centuries. Revan stood on a ship above the carnage and felt nothing. That should have been his first warning that something was terribly wrong. After Malachor, Revan and Malak pursued the fleeing Mandalorian remnants into the unknown regions. The Jedi Council waited for their triumphant return. Months passed, then a year. When Revan and Malak finally emerged from uncharted space, they were no longer Jedi. They had found something in the darkness beyond known space. Something ancient and terrible. The Sith Empire of old had hidden facilities in the unknown regions, research stations where the most forbidden experiments were conducted. Among these ruins, Revan discovered the Starforge. The Starforge was a space station the size of a small moon, built by the long-extinct Rakata species. It fed on the dark side of the Force, converting stellar matter into ships, weapons, and droids at an impossible rate. With the Starforge, Revan could produce fleets faster than the Republic could destroy them. He would have an infinite army. But the Starforge demanded payment. Its dark side radiation was not passive. It reached into the minds of those who used it, amplifying aggression, feeding on hatred, slowly transforming defenders into conquerors. Revan and Malak had gone into the unknown regions as Jedi seeking to protect the Republic from future threats. They returned as Darth Revan and Darth Malak, Sith Lords determined to conquer it. Their reasoning, if you could call it that, had a certain terrible logic. The Republic was weak. The Jedi were blind. If another threat like the Mandalorians emerged, or worse, if the ancient Sith Empire somehow returned, the galaxy would fall. Better to rule through strength than to watch civilization collapse through weakness. Revan's Sith Empire was different from anything that had come before. This was not a barbarian horde seeking to burn the galaxy. This was a calculated conquest. Revan targeted infrastructure, not populations. He recruited rather than slaughtered. His forces used captured Jedi, offering them a choice between service and death. Many chose service. The Jedi Civil War began with Revan controlling a third of the galaxy and growing stronger every day. His former comrades in the Order, Jedi who had fought beside him against the Mandalorians, now faced him across battlefields with lightsabers drawn. What made Revan truly dangerous was that he remembered being a Jedi. He knew their tactics, their philosophies, their weaknesses. Every strategy the Republic employed, he had already considered and countered. Every Jedi sent to oppose him was a student facing their teacher. The Republic was losing. Slowly but inevitably, star system after star system fell to Revan's superior forces and endless Starforge fleets. The Jedi Council, having refused to fight the Mandalorians, now watched helplessly as their greatest students destroyed everything they had sworn to protect. Then Malak betrayed Revan. During a battle, as Revan boarded a Republic ship in an attempt to capture it intact, Malak ordered his own fleet to fire on that vessel. The bombardment was so intense that Revan's ship was crippled. In the chaos, a Jedi strike team found Revan's unconscious body. Malak assumed his former master was dead and declared himself the new Dark Lord. What he did not know was that the Jedi Council had chosen to do something unprecedented. Rather than execute Revan, they used the Force to suppress his memories, creating a new identity. They would reprogram the greatest tactical mind in the galaxy and turn him against his own empire. The deception worked, though not in the way the Council intended. The reprogrammed Revan slowly recovered fragments of his past. Instead of returning to the dark side, he chose to oppose it, hunting down the Starforge and confronting Malak in a final duel. Malak, who had always been the stronger of the two in raw power, discovered that strength meant nothing against Revan's tactical genius. Even stripped of memories and weakened by his ordeal, Revan was still the superior combatant. Malak fell, and the Starforge was destroyed. The Republic claimed victory. The Jedi Council believed they had saved Revan's soul, but they were asking the wrong questions. Revan disappeared again into the unknown regions, chasing fragments of memory about what he had found there. He knew the truth that the Jedi refused to see. Something far worse than the Starforge was waiting in the darkness. An ancient Sith empire that had never truly fallen, merely hidden, and it was preparing to return. What Revan's story proved was more important than any single battle's outcome. The Sith did not need to announce themselves. They did not need vast fleets or spectacular displays of power. They could work in shadows. They could be patient. They could use the Republic's own institutions against it. A former Jedi had nearly conquered the galaxy, not through the raw fury of the dark side, but through cold calculation and strategic brilliance. He had turned the Republic's own heroes into his soldiers. He had made conquest look like salvation. The lesson was clear to anyone paying attention. The greatest Sith victories would not come from power. They would come from deception. Somewhere in the galaxy, in hidden academies on forgotten worlds, new Sith were learning from Revan's example. They studied his tactics, analyzed his mistakes, and most importantly, recognized what he had done right. The dark side was evolving. It was learning patience. And in another few centuries, that patience would give birth to something unprecedented. Not a Sith empire, not a lone Dark Lord, but a true brotherhood, thousands strong, united in purpose, and terrible in their collective strength. The galaxy was not ready for what was coming, but then again, it never was. 2,000 years before the rise of the Galactic Empire, a Jedi Master named Fannius walked away from the Order. His departure was quiet, almost peaceful. There were no dramatic confrontations, no violent outbursts. The Council simply woke one morning to find his chambers empty and his lightsaber left behind on his meditation mat. Fannius had spent decades studying the Force, longer than most masters lived. His research had led him to a conclusion the Jedi refused to accept. The light and dark were not opposites, but expressions of the same fundamental power. To truly understand the Force, one had to embrace both. The Council called this heresy. Thanius called it honesty. When he resurfaced years later, he had taken a new name, Darth Ruin. Ruin traveled to the remnants of Sith space, those scarred worlds still bearing the wounds of ancient wars. He found what he was looking for in the ruins: survivors. Not the pure-blooded Sith species, which had been extinct for millennia, but dark side practitioners who had kept the philosophy alive through oral tradition and stolen holocrons. They were scattered, weak, barely worthy of the title Sith. Darth Ruin changed that. He understood something the ancient Sith Lords had missed. Power did not have to come from a single overwhelming leader. It could be distributed, organized, made efficient. He began recruiting not just Force sensitives, but anyone with talent and ambition, former Jedi who had grown disillusioned, warlords seeking legitimacy, scholars fascinated by forbidden knowledge. Within a decade, Ruin had assembled something unprecedented. Not a Sith empire built on conquest and slavery, but a Sith brotherhood built on shared purpose. His vision was elegant in its simplicity. Multiple Sith Lords would govern different territories, each contributing their unique strengths to the collective. Warriors would lead armies, sorcerers would delve into dark side mysteries, assassins would eliminate threats before they materialized. No single point of failure, no emperor whose death would collapse the entire structure. The Jedi Order detected the rising threat too late to stop it. By the time they sent investigators to the Outer Rim, Darth Ruin controlled a dozen star systems and was training hundreds of new Sith in academies that mirrored the Jedi Temple's own structure. The new Sith Wars began not with a declaration, but with a slow realization that the Republic was bleeding from 1,000 small cuts. Trade routes were disrupted, governors were assassinated, Jedi enclaves on remote worlds simply vanished overnight. Each incident seemed unconnected, until the pattern became undeniable. The Sith were back, and this time they had learned patience. Darth Ruin's Brotherhood did not charge headlong at Coruscant. They expanded gradually, consolidating each conquest before moving to the next target. Worlds that surrendered were absorbed intact, their populations and resources put to use. Worlds that resisted were made examples of, but even then the destruction was calculated rather than emotional. The Republic responded with the only strategy it knew: it sent the Jedi. What followed was not a war in the traditional sense, but a grinding conflict of attrition that would last 1,000 years. Battles were fought, won, and lost. Territories changed hands. Entire generations lived and died, knowing nothing but war. Children born on Republic worlds grew up learning to hide when Sith ships appeared in orbit. Children born in Sith territory were trained from infancy to view the Jedi as oppressors hoarding power that rightfully belonged to the strong. Darth Ruin himself did not survive to see his vision's full flowering. He was betrayed and murdered by his own apprentice, exactly as Sith tradition demanded. But unlike previous Sith organizations that collapsed when their leader fell, the Brotherhood continued. The structure Ruin had built was larger than any individual. New Dark Lords rose to replace the fallen. Some were brilliant strategists. Others were powerful sorcerers. A few were simply terrifying combatants who commanded respect through fear. What mattered was not their individual greatness, but their collective strength. The Brotherhood established a governing body they called the Dark Council, 12 Sith Lords, each controlling different aspects of the Empire's operation: military expansion, intelligence gathering, Sith training, resource allocation, diplomatic manipulation. The system had redundancy, efficiency, and a brutal meritocracy that ensured only the competent survived. For centuries, the war ebbed and flowed. The Republic would rally, pushing Sith forces back across dozens of systems. Then a brilliant new Sith Lord would emerge, implementing some innovative tactic that reversed all those gains. The Jedi Order transformed from peacekeepers into a military force, their younglings now trained in combat as much as meditation. Both sides suffered terribly. The Republic's economy was strained to breaking by the endless military expenditure. Entire sectors were depopulated by fighting. The Jedi Order lost thousands of knights, their numbers declining year by year as the war consumed its best and brightest. The Sith were not immune to the cost either. Their philosophy encouraged ambition, which meant internal conflict was constant. A Sith Lord who became too powerful would find assassins in his bed. A Dark Council member who showed weakness would be replaced before the next sunrise. The Brotherhood survived, but its members churned through power and death in an endless cycle. By the year 1200, before the Battle of Yavin, both sides were exhausted. The Republic had lost half its original territory. The Jedi Order was a shadow of its former self. The Sith Brotherhood controlled vast regions, but was fracturing under the weight of internal rivalries. Then everything changed when a charismatic young Sith Lord named Kanan seized control. Lord Kane was different from the warlords and sorcerers who had led the Brotherhood for centuries. He was a visionary, a leader who inspired loyalty rather than demanding it through fear. He looked at the fractured Sith factions, at the competing Dark Lords, each pursuing their own agendas, and saw the fundamental problem. The Brotherhood had forgotten what made it strong: unity. Khan began traveling between Sith territories, speaking directly to the Lords and their armies. His message was simple but powerful. The Sith were losing not because the Jedi were stronger, but because Sith strength was divided. Every hour spent fighting each other was an hour the Republic used to recover. Every resource wasted on internal politics was a resource denied to the war effort. He proposed something radical: eliminate the traditional hierarchy of Sith altogether. No more Dark Lord of the Sith, no more supreme leader whose death could decapitate the entire organization. Instead, all Sith Lords would be equal. A true brotherhood where strength was measured by contribution to the collective rather than personal power. The proposal should have been laughed out of existence. Sith philosophy was built on the idea that the strong ruled the weak, that power naturally concentrated in the hands of the greatest. Equality was a Jedi concept, weakness disguised as fairness. But Kain was convincing, and the Sith were desperate. Decades of infighting had weakened them to the point where the Republic was actually gaining ground. If something did not change, the Brotherhood would follow every previous Sith empire into extinction. One by one, the Sith Lords bent the knee to Kain's vision, not because he was the strongest, though his power was considerable, but because his vision offered hope. Under his leadership, the fractured Sith factions unified into a single organization. Khan called it the Brotherhood of Darkness. The transformation was immediate and terrifying. Sith Lords who had spent decades fighting each other now coordinated their efforts. Resources flowed efficiently from industrial worlds to military fronts. Sith academies standardized their training, producing soldiers who fought as cohesive units rather than individual champions. The Republic, which had been slowly regaining lost territory, suddenly found itself on the defensive again. Kanan's Brotherhood launched coordinated offensives across a dozen sectors simultaneously. Worlds that had been Republic strongholds for centuries fell in weeks. The Jedi Order recognized the existential threat. If the Brotherhood was not stopped, the Republic would fall. They began forming their own unified response, concentrating their scattered knights into a single army. The leader they chose was a Jedi Master named Hoth, a warrior who understood that this war would not be won through meditation and diplomacy. Lord Hoth called his force the Army of Light. It was an acknowledgement of a grim reality. The Jedi had become soldiers, and this conflict would be decided by whoever was willing to sacrifice more. The two armies circled each other for months, each seeking the perfect battlefield for the final confrontation. That battlefield, when both sides finally committed, was a world called Ruusan. Ruusan was unremarkable in most ways. A forested planet in the mid-rim, lightly populated, strategically unimportant. But it sat at the intersection of several hyperspace routes, and more importantly, it was strong in the Force. The presence of life, the resonance of the living world, made it an ideal location for the kind of massive Force manipulation both sides planned to employ. The first battle was inconclusive. Both armies were too evenly matched, their leaders too skilled. The fighting raged for days before both sides withdrew to lick their wounds and plan the next engagement. Then they fought again, and again, and again. 7 times the armies clashed on Ruusan. 7 times neither side could achieve decisive victory. The forests burned. The ground was churned to mud by marching boots and artillery fire. Force users on both sides pushed themselves beyond normal limits, drawing on reserves of power they did not know they possessed. Stalemate should have led to negotiation. Instead, it led to desperation. Among Khan's forces, watching the 7th battle with growing concern, was a Sith Lord who had remained quiet throughout the entire campaign. His name was Bane, and he was beginning to realize something that would change the galaxy forever. The Brotherhood was going to lose. Not because the Jedi were stronger, but because the Brotherhood itself was fundamentally flawed. And if Bane wanted the Sith to survive what was coming, he was going to have to destroy everything Kaden had built. Darth Bane had not always been a philosopher. He had been born Desil, a cortosis miner on the poisonous world of Apatros. His childhood was brutality and poverty. His adolescence defined by violence. When he killed a man in a bar fight and fled to join the Sith army, it was not ideology that drove him, but simple survival. The Sith military machine chewed through soldiers like a meat grinder. Bane should have died in his first battle, another nameless corpse in a war that had already claimed billions. Instead, he discovered he had a gift. The Force flowed through him with a strength that even untrained was formidable. More importantly, he had a mind that could see patterns where others saw only chaos. His commanders noticed. Within months, Bane was sent to the Sith Academy on Korriban, the ancient birthplace of the dark side's power. There, among students who had trained since childhood, the former miner proved he was not just strong but brilliant. He devoured knowledge like a starving man discovering food. Ancient texts, lightsaber techniques, Force philosophies, everything the Academy offered, Bane mastered. But mastery brought questions rather than answers. The Academy's library contained holocrons created by Sith Lords from across millennia. Bane studied them all, searching for the secret that would make him invincible. What he found instead was a pattern that nobody else seemed to recognize. Every Sith empire had destroyed itself. The ancient Sith under Naga Sado had shattered when lords turned on each other at the moment of victory. Exar Kang's Brotherhood had collapsed when allies became enemies. Revan's empire had fallen to betrayal from within. And now Kang's Brotherhood of Darkness was repeating the same mistakes, just with better public relations. The problem was not the quality of individual Sith Lords. It was the entire concept of multiple Sith sharing power. The dark side, by its very nature, fed on individual ambition. It rewarded selfishness. It encouraged betrayal. Any organization built on dark side philosophy was building on a foundation of sand. Bane's most important discovery came from an unlikely source, a holocron created by Darth Revan himself. Hidden in the Academy's deepest vaults, Revan had anticipated this exact problem. He had studied the cycle of Sith self-destruction and proposed a radical solution. Only two Sith Lords, one master to embody power, one apprentice to crave it. The idea was so simple, it seemed insane. How could two Sith possibly stand against thousands of Jedi? How could a lineage survive if it was constantly killing itself? Bane understood what others had missed. The point was not immediate victory, but inevitable triumph. Two Sith working in absolute secrecy could not be detected or destroyed. They could plan across generations, building power slowly and methodically. When the apprentice finally killed the master, it proved the apprentice was stronger, ensuring the Sith lineage only grew more powerful over time. Quality over quantity. Patience over aggression. Evolution over stagnation. It was the opposite of everything the Brotherhood of Darkness represented. Kadan had built an organization where mediocre Sith Lords were considered equals to the truly talented, where resources were spread thin across hundreds of students who would never amount to anything significant, where political maneuvering mattered more than actual strength. The Brotherhood was not making the Sith stronger. It was diluting them into irrelevance. Bane brought his concerns to other Sith Lords, carefully testing their reactions. Most dismissed him as arrogant, a talented student who had let his abilities inflate his ego. A few saw merit in his arguments, but lacked the courage to act on them. Challenging Kazan meant challenging the entire power structure, and even Sith Lords valued their lives. Bane realized he would have to act alone. But he could not simply leave the Brotherhood. Kayan would hunt down any deserter as a traitor. The only way to implement the rule of two was to ensure the Brotherhood destroyed itself so completely that Bane could rise from the ashes unnoticed. He began his manipulation during the siege of Ruusan. The seventh battle had ended in another stalemate, but Bane could see the trajectory. The Brotherhood was slowly losing, not in dramatic fashion, but through cumulative attrition. Lord Hoth's army of light was smaller, but more unified. The Jedi fought with a clarity of purpose the Sith could not match. Every day that passed without decisive Sith victory was effectively a defeat. Khan grew increasingly frustrated. His vision of Sith unity was crumbling as Lords began questioning his leadership. Some wanted to retreat and regroup. Others advocated for even more aggressive tactics. The equality Khan had promised was becoming a liability, as every Sith Lord believed their opinion deserved equal weight. Bane encouraged the dissent. Quietly, through carefully placed words and subtle manipulation, he amplified every doubt and magnified every disagreement. He made sure Kadan heard whispers of potential betrayal. He ensured ambitious Lords knew that others were plotting against them. But his most brilliant manipulation was introducing Kada to the thought bomb. The ancient Sith had created many superweapons, most lost to time and circumstance. The thought bomb was among the most terrible. It was not a physical device, but a force ritual that required willing participants. Multiple force users would combine their essences into a single devastating explosion of dark side energy. The detonation would annihilate every force-sensitive being within its blast radius, Jedi and Sith alike. The ancient Sith had considered it a weapon of last resort, so terrible that using it guaranteed mutual destruction. But Bane, studying the ritual specifications in forbidden texts, realized it could serve his purpose perfectly. He presented the thought bomb to Kain not as a suicide weapon, but as the ultimate victory. The ritual would kill all the Jedi on Ruusan, while the Sith, protected by the dark side, would survive. It was a lie, but Bane delivered it with such confidence that Kain wanted to believe it. Khan's desperation made him vulnerable to deception. The war was turning against him. His authority was fragmenting. He needed something, anything, that would secure victory and cement his position as leader of the Brotherhood. Bane also began feeding intelligence to the Jedi, not directly, which would have been detected, but through intermediaries and carefully arranged leaks. He made sure Lord Hoth knew exactly where Kane's forces were weakest. He ensured the Jedi had intelligence suggesting the Sith were planning something catastrophic on Ruusan. The trap was set. All that remained was to spring it. Before the final battle, Bane took a pilgrimage. He traveled to Lehan, the homeworld of the extinct Rakata species. There, in ruins older than the Republic itself, he found Darth Revan's most complete teachings. Not the fragmented holocron from the Korriban Academy, but the full philosophy of Sith survival. Revan had foreseen everything. The cycles of destruction, the inevitable collapse of any multi-Sith organization, and the solution, elegant in its brutality. The rule of two was not merely a suggestion, but a fundamental law, as immutable as gravity. Bane emerged from those ruins transformed. He was no longer just a talented Sith Lord, questioning his organization's methods. He was the prophet of a new order, the architect of the Sith's future. He returned to Ruusan for the final battle, not to participate, but to witness the Brotherhood's end. Khan, driven to the edge of madness by stress and paranoia, had committed fully to the thought bomb. Nearly 100 Sith Lords agreed to participate in the ritual. Some believed Khan's promise that they would survive. Others knew it was suicide, but preferred death to defeat. A few, the most pragmatic, simply recognized that the Brotherhood was finished regardless, and chose to take as many Jedi with them as possible. Lord Hoth, sensing the massive dark side energy gathering on Ruusan, led his entire army of light in a desperate charge to stop whatever the Sith were planning. He knew it was likely a trap. He went anyway because that is what Jedi did. They rushed toward darkness, hoping to be a light within it. The two armies converged on a massive cave system beneath Ruusan's surface. The Sith Lords had gathered in the deepest chamber, their combined presence in the Force creating a nexus of dark energy so intense that it warped reality around them. Khan stood at the center, leading the ritual, his voice rising in ancient Sith incantations that had not been spoken in thousands of years. Bane watched from a ridge several kilometers away. He had taken every holocron of value from the Sith archives, every text that contained knowledge worth preserving. The Brotherhood's accumulated wisdom would not die with its lords. In the cave, reality began to scream. The thought bomb's creation was not instantaneous. It required the ritual participants to pour their very life force into a single point, compressing their essences into a weapon of pure Force energy. The process was agony. Sith Lords who had endured torture without flinching wept as their souls were torn apart and woven together. Lord Hoth's Jedi crashed into the cave just as the ritual reached its critical point. They cut through the outer chambers, their lightsabers blazing in the darkness, desperately trying to reach the ritual chamber and disrupt whatever horror the Sith were creating. They were seconds too late. Khan, his sanity finally shattered by the ritual's demands, screamed the final words of the incantation. The thought bomb detonated. What happened next defied description. Witnesses kilometers away reported seeing a flash of crimson light, so intense it burned after images into their retinas. The Force itself convulsed, every sensitive being in the star system feeling the moment when 200 souls were simultaneously obliterated. In the cave there was no time for final words or heroic last stands. The Sith Lords simply ceased to exist, their bodies and spirits consumed by the weapon they had created. Lord Hoth and his Jedi, caught in the same blast, died without understanding what had killed them. The thought bomb's energy did not dissipate naturally. It created a wound in the Force, trapping the spirits of everyone it had killed in eternal torment. For thousands of years afterward, the valley would be haunted by Force ghosts, locked in a perpetual cycle of their final moments. Republic forces, arriving in orbit hours later, found a landscape transformed. The forests around the cave were flattened. The cave itself had collapsed into a crater. Scanning for life signs revealed nothing. No Sith, no Jedi, just silence and the lingering echo of the Force screaming. They declared victory. The Sith were extinct. The war was over. On a ship departing the Ruusan system, Darth Bane permitted himself a smile. The Brotherhood of Darkness was destroyed. The Jedi believed they had won. And in the cargo hold of his vessel, secured in a sealed container, were the holocrons that contained the accumulated knowledge of the Sith across 7,000 years. The rule of two could now begin. But first, Bane needed an apprentice worthy of the legacy he would create. Ruusan had been a beautiful world once. Its forests stretched from pole to pole, ancient trees reaching toward skies so clear you could see stars even in daylight. The native species, simple creatures living in harmony with the Force, had known nothing of war or hatred. 6 battles had transformed paradise into purgatory. The forests were now graveyards of charred stumps and ash. The soil, once rich and dark, was churned into toxic mud from artillery bombardment and the corpses of thousands decomposing beneath its surface. The air itself tasted wrong, contaminated by ozone from lightsaber clashes and the lingering presence of so much death. Both armies had been fighting on Ruusan for nearly a year, not continuously, but in waves. Battle, retreat, regroup, battle again. Each engagement followed the same pattern. The Brotherhood of Darkness would attempt to break through Jedi lines, using overwhelming force and dark side battle meditation. The Army of Light would hold, their defensive formations absorbing the assault until the Sith exhausted themselves. Then the cycle would repeat. By the 7th battle, both sides were operating on hatred and muscle memory rather than any coherent strategy. Lord Kaan commanded the Brotherhood forces from a command ship in orbit, though increasingly he felt compelled to descend to the surface personally. His Sith Lords, nearly 100 of the most powerful dark side users in the galaxy, had encamped in a valley on Ruusan's southern continent. They had converted natural caves into a fortress, extending tunnels deep into the planet's crust using both conventional excavation and force manipulation. The Brotherhood's ground forces numbered in the tens of thousands. Sith troopers, warriors trained from childhood in combat, but lacking force sensitivity. War droids of a dozen different configurations. Mercenaries attracted by promises of plunder. And scattered among them, the Sith acolytes, students too weak or untalented to become full lords, but dangerous enough to augment the army's strength. Lord Hoth's Army of Light held the northern regions of the continent. His force was smaller, perhaps 20,000 Republic soldiers, supplemented by local militias and volunteers. But where the Brotherhood had numbers, the army had cohesion. These soldiers fought not for conquest, but for survival. They knew that if they broke, if they retreated, the Sith would sweep across the galaxy like a plague. And they had the Jedi. 109 Jedi Knights and Masters had joined the Army of Light. Some were veterans of decades of warfare, grizzled warriors who barely remembered what peace felt like. Others were young, students rushed through their training because the Order no longer had the luxury of proper preparation. All of them understood they were probably going to die on this world. The Jedi had established meditation circles, groups of knights who would pool their strength to counter the Sith battle meditation. When Sith Lords attempted to cloud Republic soldiers' minds or amplify their fear, Jedi would push back, creating bubbles of clarity in the chaos. It was exhausting work, requiring constant vigilance and consuming energy that left the Jedi vulnerable to physical attack. Both sides had tried to break the stalemate through various tactics. The Sith had attempted flanking maneuvers, orbital bombardments, even assassination strikes against Jedi leadership. The Republic had countered with commando raids on Sith supply lines, attempts to turn Brotherhood soldiers through propaganda, and their own assassination attempts. Nothing worked. The war ground on. What neither side fully understood was that the stalemate itself was changing the nature of their conflict. This was no longer about territory or ideology. It had become personal. Jedi who watched their friends cut down by Sith began to hate in ways that went against every principle of their order. Sith who lost comrades to Jedi strikes found themselves forming bonds of loyalty that contradicted the dark side's emphasis on self-interest. The war was transforming both armies into mirror images of each other. Darth Bane observed this transformation with clinical detachment. He moved among the Brotherhood forces, ostensibly serving as just another Sith Lord contributing to the war effort. In reality, he was conducting an experiment in controlled demolition. His first move was to exacerbate existing tensions among the Sith Lords. Kayn's vision of equality had created a command structure where every major decision required consensus. This worked when victories came easily. Under the pressure of prolonged stalemate, it became paralysis. Bane would approach individual lords privately, each time tailoring his message to their specific grievances. To the warriors, he suggested that the sorcerers were hoarding knowledge rather than sharing it for the Brotherhood's benefit. To the sorcerers, he intimated that the warriors were too simple-minded to understand the subtleties of dark side power. To the ambitious, he whispered that Kayn's leadership was the only thing preventing their rightful ascension. The poison worked slowly but thoroughly. By the time preparations for the seventh battle began, the Brotherhood's unity was a facade maintained only by the external threat of the Jedi. Bane's second manipulation was more direct. He began feeding tactical information to Jedi spies. The Republic had agents in the Sith camp. Local civilians coerced or bribed into gathering intelligence. Bane identified them through careful observation and force sensing. Rather than expose them, he ensured they discovered information that would make Lord Hoth believe the Sith were planning something catastrophic. The intelligence was not entirely false. The Sith were planning something catastrophic. Bane was just making sure the Jedi knew enough to respond in exactly the way he needed. Meanwhile, he introduced Kanan to the concept of the thought bomb. The holocron containing the ritual's specifications was ancient, created by a Sith Lord whose name had been lost to history. Bane had discovered it in the depths of the Korriban Academy, filed among other forbidden weapons that the Brotherhood had deemed too dangerous or impractical to use. The thought bomb was both. Bane presented it to Kayn during a private meeting, choosing his moment carefully. The Brotherhood had just lost another skirmish. Not a major defeat, but enough to rattle confidence. Kayn was exhausted, his force presence flickering with barely controlled rage. The ritual, Bane explained, would require willing participants, multiple Sith Lords pooling their power into a single devastating strike. The resulting explosion would annihilate every Force user in its radius, but the ancient texts, Bane lied smoothly, indicated that those who initiated the ritual would be protected by the dark side itself. The Jedi would perish. The Sith would triumph. Kayn should have questioned this. He should have demanded proof, verification, time to study the ritual himself. But he was desperate, and desperate men believe what they need to believe. He ordered preparations to begin. Not all the Sith Lords agreed. Some recognized the thought bomb for what it was, a weapon of mutual destruction. But Kanan no longer cared about consensus. He had abandoned his own principle of equality in favor of autocratic command. Those who questioned were accused of cowardice. Those who refused were threatened with execution for treason. The Brotherhood fractured. Some lords fled Ruusan entirely, abandoning the war rather than participate in what they correctly identified as suicide. Others stayed out of loyalty, misplaced faith, or simple fatalism. 99 Sith Lords remained. When the ritual preparations were complete, Lord Hoth, receiving intelligence about massive dark side energy gathering on Ruusan, made his own desperate decision. He ordered every Jedi in the Army of Light to prepare for a final assault. They would strike at the heart of the Sith position, disrupting whatever horror the Brotherhood was planning, even if it meant sacrificing themselves in the process. It was the decision Bane had predicted with perfect accuracy. The seventh battle began at dawn, though Ruusan's perpetual cloud cover made dawn barely distinguishable from night. Republic forces advanced across the scorched no-man's land, separating the two armies. Artillery opened up from both sides, shells screaming through the air and detonating in fountains of earth and flame. But the real battle was happening underground. The Sith Lords had gathered in the deepest chamber of their cave complex, a natural cavern the size of a cathedral. Catan stood at the center, his presence in the Force blazing like a dark star. Around him, in concentric circles, knelt the other Sith Lords. They had shed their armor and weapons, wearing only simple robes. The ritual required total focus, no distractions, no second thoughts. Catan began the incantation. The words were old, predating even the ancient Sith Empire. They resonated in the Force, each syllable heavy with power and purpose. The Sith Lords joined in, their voices merging into a chorus that was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Above ground, Jedi sensed the gathering darkness. It felt like reality was being compressed, squeezed into a single point of infinite density. Lord Hoth ordered an immediate advance, all subtlety abandoned. His Jedi charged through the battlefield, deflecting blaster bolts and cutting down Sith troopers racing toward the cave entrance. The Republic soldiers, seeing their Jedi leaders sprint forward, followed with desperate courage. The battle became a chaotic melee, formations dissolving into individual fights as both armies clashed in the ruins of Ruusan's forests. Beneath them, the ritual accelerated. The Sith Lords were pouring their very essence into the thought bomb's creation. It was not a pleasant process. Each participant felt their connection to their physical body weakening, their individual consciousness beginning to blur into the collective. Some panicked, trying to withdraw from the ritual, but it was too late. The process, once started, could not be stopped. Khan felt it too. The moment of doubt when he realized Bane had been right, that the thought bomb would consume Sith and Jedi alike. But by then his soul was already being torn from his body and woven into the weapon. All he could do was scream the final words of the incantation and pray that his sacrifice would at least destroy the Jedi. The Jedi broke through into the cave system. Lord Hoth led the charge, his blue lightsaber blazing in the darkness. Behind him came his best warriors, masters and knights who had survived a decade of warfare through skill and determination. They sprinted through tunnels that seemed to pulse with dark side energy, each step feeling like wading through tar. The Force itself was wrong here, contaminated by what the Sith were doing in the depths below. Hoth burst into the ritual chamber, just as Karon spoke the final syllable. For one eternal instant, the Jedi Master and the Sith Lord made eye contact across the vast cavern. Hoth saw the madness in Khan's eyes. Khan saw the horror in Hoth's realization of what was about to happen. Then the thought bomb detonated, and the Force screamed loud enough to be heard across the galaxy. The detonation was not fire or light in any conventional sense. It was the Force itself being ripped apart and reformed into something that should never have existed. The explosion erupted outward from the ritual chamber in a sphere of crimson energy that defied physics. It passed through solid rock as though the stone were mere suggestion. It overtook the charging Jedi. Before they could process what was happening, Lord Hoth, at the forefront of his warriors, felt the wave approaching and had perhaps 1 second to understand that he had failed. His final thought was not of victory or defeat, but of profound sadness that so many would die because of choices made by zealots on both sides. The thought bomb consumed him, not just his body, though that disintegrated into component atoms, but his very essence. His connection to the Force was severed and simultaneously bound into the weapons matrix. He became part of the explosion, even as the explosion destroyed him. Behind Hoth, 108 Jedi died in the same instant. Some were still running when the wave hit, others had stopped, frozen by the realization of what was coming. A few had time to ignite their lightsabers in futile defense. The thought bomb made no distinction between the prepared and the panicked. It simply erased them from existence. In the ritual chamber, the 99 Sith Lords experienced something worse than death. They had willingly poured their essences into the thought bomb's creation, believing either that they would survive or that their sacrifice would secure Sith victory. As the weapon detonated, they discovered the horrifying truth. Their souls did not dissipate. They were trapped, woven into the fabric of the explosion itself, forced to experience their own annihilation over and over in an eternal loop. Khan's consciousness, fragmented but still aware, screamed silently as he felt himself being torn apart and reassembled countless times per second. The thought bomb's physical manifestation lasted perhaps 5 seconds. To those caught within it, those 5 seconds were infinity. Above ground, the armies watched in horror as a dome of crimson light erupted from the cave system. It expanded to a radius of several kilometers before stopping abruptly, as though hitting an invisible wall. For a moment it hung there, a hemisphere of pure dark side energy, so intense that non-force sensitives felt it as pressure against their minds. Then it collapsed inward, imploding back to its point of origin with a sound like reality breaking. The shock wave that followed was more conventional. A wall of superheated air and debris blasted outward from the cave entrance, flattening what remained of the forest and throwing soldiers from both armies to the ground. The cave system itself collapsed, millions of tons of rock falling into the void left by the thought bomb's detonation. When the dust settled, there was silence. Republic soldiers picked themselves up slowly, ears ringing, minds struggling to process what they had witnessed. Many were weeping without understanding why. Others simply stared at the crater where the cave entrance had been, their expressions blank with shock. The Sith army was in worse condition. Every force sensitive among them, every acolyte and apprentice who had stayed above ground rather than participating in the ritual, had felt the moment when their lords died. Some had gone catatonic from the psychic backlash. Others were screaming, clutching their heads as though they could physically hold their sanity together. Without leadership, without purpose, the Brotherhood's forces simply stopped fighting. Weapons were dropped, positions abandoned. Soldiers who had been killing each other minutes before now sat in the ruins, too exhausted and traumatized to continue. A Republic general, one of the few officers who had maintained some presence of mind, ordered his forces to stand down. There was nobody left to fight. The war was over. Republic fleet elements in orbit detected the massive force disturbance and sent reconnaissance shuttles to investigate. What they found defied easy explanation. The crater was massive, easily a kilometer across, and at its center was something that their sensors identified as an anomaly. Not a physical object, but a tear in the fabric of space itself, leaking dark side energy like a wound that refused to heal. Jedi who approached the crater reported hearing voices, screams, pleas for help that came from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. The braver ones ventured closer, trying to understand what had happened. They described feeling the presence of the dead, Force ghosts trapped in a state between life and death, reliving their final moments in perpetual torment. One Jedi, a young knight named Valentine Farfalla, who had arrived too late to join the final charge, attempted to commune with the spirits. He emerged from the attempt pale and shaking, refusing to speak of what he had experienced for the rest of his life. The Republic declared the site forbidden. They established a perimeter, forbidding anyone from approaching the crater. In time, they would build a memorial, though nobody could agree on what exactly they were memorializing. A victory? A tragedy? The end of an era? News of Ruusan's outcome spread across the galaxy with surprising speed. The war that had consumed 1,000 years was over. The Sith were extinct. The Jedi had triumphed, though at a cost that would haunt the Order for generations. Celebrations erupted on Coruscant and 1,000 other worlds. Citizens who had never known peace wept in the streets. The Republic Senate declared a holiday. The Jedi Temple held ceremonies honoring the fallen, though privately the Council grappled with what the war had done to their order. They had sent peacekeepers to war and received soldiers in return. Jedi who had spent a decade killing in the name of the greater good would struggle to return to meditation and diplomacy. The Order's numbers were devastated. Nearly half their knights dead. Entire lineages of teaching had been lost when masters fell without passing on their knowledge. But they had won. The Sith were gone. That had to count for something. On a transport ship 3 systems away from Ruusan, Darth Bane listened to the reports and permitted himself a rare moment of satisfaction. The thought bomb had worked exactly as intended. The Brotherhood of Darkness was annihilated. The Jedi believed they had achieved total victory, and in the chaos of the war's end, nobody noticed one Sith Lord slipping away into the shadows. Bane's cargo hold was filled with treasures that would have made any Jedi Council member weep with rage. Sith holocrons spanning thousands of years. Ancient texts describing techniques the Jedi had tried to erase from history. Alchemical formulas, lightsaber schematics, the accumulated wisdom of the dark side, preserved while its practitioners destroyed themselves. The rule of 2 could now begin in earnest. But first, Bane needed to complete his own education. He set course for Dixon, one of Onderon's moons. Freedom Nad's tomb was there, and with it, knowledge that even the Brotherhood's archives had not contained. Bane would spend months in study, pushing himself to the absolute limits of what the dark side could offer. The Jedi thought they had won the war. They had merely survived the transition between Sith eras. Back on Ruusan, the crater continued to leak dark side energy. The trapped spirits screamed silently, caught in a loop of their final agonizing moments. Karan's consciousness, fragmented across the thought bomb's matrix, experienced the paradox of being simultaneously aware and insane. The Force itself was scarred by what had happened. Sensitive beings who visited Ruusan decades later would report feeling wrong, as though the planet remembered its trauma and could not heal. The crater became a pilgrimage site for those studying the dark side, a warning of what happened when ambition exceeded wisdom. But warnings, as history repeatedly demonstrated, were only effective for those willing to listen. Centuries later, a Sith Lord named Darth Gravid would study the Battle of Ruusan and conclude that Khan's mistake was not in using the thought bomb, but in including himself in the ritual. The weapon itself was sound, the application was flawed. Millennia later, Darth Sidious would read accounts of the Brotherhood's end and understand the lesson Bane had learned. Power concentrated was power preserved. Power distributed was power wasted. The thought bomb's detonation had killed 200 Force users in one terrible moment. But its true impact was philosophical rather than tactical. It proved beyond any argument that the Sith could not be trusted to work together. Their nature, fueled by the dark side's inherent selfishness, would always tear apart any organization built on shared power. The Brotherhood of Darkness had been the largest, most organized Sith force in galactic history. They had come closer to defeating the Jedi than any previous dark side movement. They had refined Sith philosophy, established training academies, created a command structure that should have been sustainable. And they had destroyed themselves more thoroughly than any Jedi army ever could have. In the weeks following Ruusan, Republic forces hunted down the scattered remnants of the Brotherhood. Sith, who had fled before the final battle, were tracked to their hiding places and either killed or captured. Academies on remote worlds were discovered and destroyed. Holocrons were seized and locked away in Jedi vaults. The purge was systematic and brutal. The Republic and Jedi, having finally defeated the Sith, were determined to ensure they could never return. They succeeded in eliminating every Sith they knew about. The one Sith they did not know about, the one who had orchestrated the Brotherhood's destruction and inherited its accumulated knowledge, was already planning a revenge that would unfold across 1,000 years. Darth Bane emerged from Freda Nad's tomb changed. The knowledge he had absorbed, combined with his own insights, had transformed him from merely powerful into something unprecedented. He understood the dark side in ways the Brotherhood never had, not as a tool for conquest, but as a philosophy of evolution. The weak would be culled, the strong would survive. And in time, through careful cultivation across generations, the Sith would produce an individual so powerful that even 1,000 Jedi could not stand against them. But that required patience. It required secrecy. It required abandoning every instinct that screamed for immediate gratification and glory. Bane could do this because he understood something fundamental. He was not building a legacy for himself. He was building a legacy that would outlive him by centuries. His name would be forgotten. His accomplishments would be attributed to others or lost entirely. But the Sith would survive. And surviving was the only victory that truly mattered. He stood in the ruins of Nad's tomb, surrounded by crumbling stone and the whispers of dead Sith lords, and made his declaration to the Force itself. The Brotherhood was dead. Long live the rule of two. Bane's search for an apprentice took him to places the Jedi had long forgotten. He traveled to Korriban, walking among tombs that held nothing but dust and echoes. He visited Ziost, where ancient Sith temples stood empty beneath alien skies. He explored Drummond Kayas, fighting through the wildlife that had reclaimed what was once the heart of a dark empire. Everywhere he went, he found ruins, evidence of greatness reduced to rubble, proof that power without sustainability was merely spectacle. The galaxy was filled with Force sensitives, children born with abilities they did not understand, adults who had discovered they could move objects with their minds or sense emotions in others, but raw talent was not enough. They needed someone who could be shaped, who possessed not just power but the capacity for growth. He found her on Ruusan. The girl was perhaps 10 years old, though malnutrition made her appear younger. She had survived the war by hiding in the ruins, scavenging from corpses and fleeing whenever soldiers approached. Her name was Rain, though Bane would give her a new one. What drew his attention was not her appearance, but her presence in the Force. She was strong, stronger than most Jedi Knights, and completely untrained. More importantly, she had killed, not in self-defense or accident, but deliberately, using the Force to crush the throat of a man who had threatened her. She felt no guilt about it. That was what convinced Bane she was perfect. He approached her carefully. The girl was feral, more animal than human, after months alone in the wastes. But Bane was patient. He offered food, shelter, safety. Slowly, over days and then weeks, he gained her trust. Only then did he begin her education. He named her Zana, a Sith name carrying the weight of ancient tradition. She did not understand its significance, but she would. Bane's training was methodical and brutal. He taught her to channel her anger into power, to see compassion as weakness, to understand that the galaxy was divided into the strong and the prey. But he also taught her to think. The Brotherhood's downfall had been their inability to plan beyond immediate victory. Zana would learn strategy that spanned decades. She would understand that patience was not weakness, but the ultimate expression of strength. Their training took place on Ambria, a desert world strong in the dark side. There, isolated from the galaxy, Bane pushed his apprentice to her absolute limits. He taught her lightsaber combat, studying ancient holocrons to master forms. The Jedi believed lost. He instructed her in Sith sorcery, showing her how to manipulate minds and twist reality through the Force. Most importantly, he taught her the philosophy that would guide the Sith for 1,000 years. Two there should be. No more, no less. One to embody power, the other to crave it. Zana struggled to understand at first. Why limit themselves to two? With more Sith, they could challenge the Jedi directly, could rebuild the armies the Brotherhood had commanded. Bane's response was to show her the thought bomb crater. They traveled to Ruusan, now forbidden by Republic decree, but easily bypassed by those skilled in stealth. Bane led Xana to the edge of the crater where 200 Force users had died. The dark side energy was still palpable, a wound that refused to heal. He made her listen to the voices, the trapped spirits forever screaming their final moments. Sith Lords who had believed in unity, in the strength of numbers, in Cardin's vision of equality. This is what happens when the Sith forget their nature, Bane told her. The dark side does not share. It consumes. Build an organization of dark side users, and they will destroy each other as surely as the sun rises, but maintain only two, and there is no competition, only succession. Xana listened to the screams and understood. Bane's education was not limited to the dark side. He taught Xana galactic history, politics, economics. She learned to read people, to identify leverage and exploit weakness. A Sith Lord in hiding needed skills beyond Force lightning and lightsaber combat. Years passed. Xana grew from a feral child into a formidable young woman. Her power in the Force expanded exponentially under Bane's guidance. More importantly, her mind sharpened into a weapon as dangerous as any lightsaber. Meanwhile, Bane pursued his own studies. He sought out the holocron of Darth Andi, an ancient Sith Lord who had achieved a form of immortality through dark side rituals. The search took him to Prakith, a fortress world where Andi's cult still maintained his tomb. The retrieval was costly. Bane fought through the cult's defenses, claiming the holocron at the price of severe injuries. But the knowledge he gained was worth the suffering. Anded's teachings on essence transfer, on preserving consciousness beyond death, gave Bane ideas about how to extend the rule of two beyond normal lifespans. He experimented with Sith alchemy, using the dark side to modify his own body. The process created a shell of living armor, organisms called obelisks that bonded to his flesh and fed on dark side energy. They made him nearly invulnerable but came with a cost. The obelisks slowly poisoned him, their presence a constant agony that Bane endured because pain made him stronger. The galaxy, meanwhile, celebrated its newfound peace. The Ruusan Reformation reshaped the Republic's military structure. The Jedi Order, no longer needed as warriors, transitioned back to their role as peacekeepers. Planets demobilized their armies. Trade flourished as hyperspace lanes that had been war zones for generations became safe again. A new calendar was established, marking years as either before or after the Battle of Ruusan. It was a declaration that the galaxy had entered a new era, one where the old conflicts were relegated to history. The Jedi Council, while grateful for peace, struggled with what the war had cost them. So many dead, so much knowledge lost. Entire philosophies of Force use had been destroyed when their practitioners fell on distant battlefields. The Council established new rules, new restrictions, trying to ensure their order would never again be twisted into an army. They also attempted to purge all Sith knowledge from existence. Holocrons were destroyed, texts were burned, ancient temples were collapsed. The Council believed that if they could eliminate the knowledge, they could prevent the dark side from ever rising again. They were partially successful. Thousands of artifacts were lost forever, their wisdom erased from history. But the most important knowledge, the most dangerous teachings, survived in Bane's possession. After 10 years of training, Xana attempted to kill Bane. It was expected, even encouraged. The rule of two demanded that the apprentice eventually surpass the master. Bane had been waiting for Xana to develop the confidence to challenge him, to believe she was ready. Their duel lasted hours. Xana had grown powerful, her command of Sith sorcery exceeding even Bane's expectations. She wielded illusions that could drive opponents to madness, creating nightmares so vivid they felt real. But Bane had decades of experience and the protection of his obelisk armor. He weathered Xana's assault, countering her sorcery with raw power and superior technique. In the end, Xana realized she was not yet ready. She yielded, accepting that she still had more to learn. Bane was pleased. The apprentice who knew her limits was more valuable than one who died from overconfidence. Their training continued. As decades passed, the Sith lineage began to take shape. Bane taught Xana everything, holding back nothing. When she finally did surpass him, when age and the obelisk's poison weakened him enough that she could strike the killing blow, she would become the master, and she would find her own apprentice, continuing the cycle. Each generation would be stronger than the last. Each Sith Lord would add their knowledge to what came before, creating a compound growth of power and wisdom. The Jedi's strength was in their numbers and their tradition. The Sith's strength would be in their concentration and their evolution. Bane also established protocols that would guide the Sith for centuries. The master and apprentice should rarely appear together publicly. They should cultivate different identities, different lives, ensuring that if one was discovered, the other would survive. They should infiltrate the Republic's institutions, placing agents in positions of influence who need not even know they served the Sith. Most importantly, they must be patient. The grand plan, as Bane termed it, would unfold over centuries. No single Sith Lord would see its completion, but each would contribute to the foundation, building toward an eventual triumph so complete that the Jedi would never recover. Bane's vision extended beyond his own lifetime, beyond even his apprentice's lifetime. He was planting seeds that would take 1,000 years to bear fruit. The irony was not lost on him. The Brotherhood had sought immediate victory and achieved immediate extinction. Bane sought distant victory and created a legacy that would outlast empires. When Bane finally died, killed by Xana in a duel that nearly destroyed them both, the Sith did not weaken, they strengthened. Xana took an apprentice of her own, a former Jedi named Darth Cognos. The lineage continued. Generation after generation, the Sith refined their philosophy. Some masters emphasized lightsaber combat, others focused on force abilities. A few specialized in political manipulation or technological innovation. Each added their expertise to the growing body of knowledge passed from master to apprentice. The Jedi, meanwhile, grew complacent. Centuries of peace convinced them the Sith were a solved problem, a threat that existed only in history texts. When their seers had visions of darkness, the Council dismissed them as echoes of the past rather than warnings of the future. This was exactly what Bane had predicted. The rule of two was not just a survival strategy, it was a weapon, one that the Jedi could not defend against because they did not know it existed. Two Sith, working in absolute secrecy across generations, slowly infiltrating every level of Republic society. By the time the Jedi realized the Sith had returned, it would be too late to stop them. Bane's final contribution was the most subtle. He encoded within the rule of two a mechanism for ensuring quality control. If a master grew weak or complacent, the apprentice was obligated to kill them. If an apprentice proved unworthy, the master could eliminate them and find a better student. The system was self-correcting, brutal in its efficiency. The galaxy celebrated peace while darkness prepared in silence. The Jedi meditated in their temple, while Sith Lords moved among them unseen. The Republic's citizens went about their lives, never knowing that their government was being slowly hollowed out from within. And in the depths of space, in hidden academies on forgotten worlds, the Sith learned patience. They studied, they planned, they waited. The Brotherhood of Darkness had tried to defeat the Jedi through overwhelming force. They had fielded armies of thousands, commanded fleets that darkened skies, and still they had failed. The rule of two would defeat the Jedi through overwhelming patience. Two Sith, working across 1,000 years, building a conspiracy so vast and so subtle that by the time it was detected, victory would already be assured. Darth Bane had destroyed the Brotherhood to save the Sith. In doing so, he had created something far more dangerous than any army. He had created an idea, and ideas were immortal. Understanding why the Brotherhood failed requires understanding what it accomplished. This was not a minor footnote in galactic history, but a force that nearly reshaped civilization itself. At its height, the Brotherhood of Darkness controlled territory spanning hundreds of star systems. Their influence reached into the Republic Senate. Their agents operated on Coruscant itself, and their military might was sufficient to fight the combined forces of the Republic and Jedi Order to a standstill. They had achieved what no previous Sith organization had managed: genuine unity across thousands of dark side practitioners. Lord Katan's vision of equality among Sith Lords was revolutionary. For the first time, Sith did not need to constantly watch their backs, fearing assassination from their own allies. They could focus their energy on external enemies rather than internal competition. Resources were pooled rather than hoarded. Knowledge was shared rather than jealously guarded. The results spoke for themselves. The new Sith Wars lasted 1,000 years, specifically because the Brotherhood was effective enough to sustain prolonged conflict. Previous Sith empires had collapsed within decades or even years. Khan's organization endured for generations, adapting to setbacks and learning from defeats. Their academies produced Force users at a scale the galaxy had not seen since the ancient Sith Empire. Korriban's training grounds were restored and expanded. New facilities were established on dozens of worlds, each specializing in different aspects of dark side mastery. A student could study Sith alchemy on one world, lightsaber combat on another, and Force sorcery on a third, accumulating expertise that would have taken lifetimes to acquire through solo study. The Brotherhood also pioneered new approaches to warfare. They understood logistics, supply chains, and the importance of sustainable conquest. Unlike earlier Sith, who simply destroyed what they could not control, Khan's forces occupied and administered captured territories. They established governance structures, maintained infrastructure, and created systems that could function without constant Sith oversight. This was empire building of a sophistication that previous dark-side organizations had never achieved. Their development of thought bombs and other Force superweapons demonstrated technological innovation combined with ancient knowledge. The Brotherhood did not merely preserve old Sith teachings, but actively built upon them, experimenting and refining techniques that had remained static for millennia. In many ways, the Brotherhood represented the Sith ideal: strength through unity, knowledge through shared study, power through organized effort. So why did it fail? The answer lies in a fundamental contradiction at the heart of dark side philosophy. The Force's dark aspect feeds on individual emotion, personal ambition, and selfish desire. These are inherently isolating qualities. Anger is personal, hatred is directed. Ambition cannot be truly shared because it demands supremacy. Khan's equality was an attempt to impose light-side values onto dark-side practitioners. The Jedi could embrace selflessness and collective good because their philosophy encouraged it. The Sith, by contrast, were taught that power was the only virtue and that compassion was weakness. Every Sith Lord in the Brotherhood believed, at some level, that they deserved to rule. They accepted Khan's leadership because it was pragmatic, not because they believed in equality as a principle. The moment the war turned against them, the moment Khan's strategy appeared to be failing, that latent ambition reasserted itself. The internal fractures were always there. Kadan simply managed to keep them suppressed through force of personality and the external pressure of fighting the Jedi. Remove either factor and the Brotherhood would have torn itself apart even without Bane's manipulation. This pattern repeated across Sith history. Exar Kun's Brotherhood had united fallen Jedi and dark side cultists, achieving temporary success before collapsing when Ulic Qel-Drama's commitment wavered. Revan's Sith Empire had been undermined by Malak's betrayal. The ancient Sith Empire under Naga Sadow had shattered when Ludo Kresh challenged his leadership. Every time the Sith gathered in numbers, they destroyed themselves. The Jedi understood this, even if they did not articulate it clearly. Their philosophy was built around selflessness, specifically because the Force rewarded collective effort. When channeled through the light side, multiple Jedi could work together, their powers complementing rather than competing. Battle meditation led by one Jedi could be amplified by others without triggering rivalry. The dark side offered no such synergy. 100 Sith Lords using battle meditation together did not produce 100 times the effect. They produced chaos, their individual wills clashing even as they attempted to work in concert. Khan's mistake was believing that organizational structure could overcome philosophical reality. He created systems, hierarchies, and rules designed to channel Sith ambition toward productive ends. It worked for a time, proving it was possible, but sustainability required something Khan could not provide, a way to fundamentally alter how the dark side interacted with human psychology. The thought bomb's deployment was the inevitable conclusion of the Brotherhood's internal contradictions. Kayan, facing defeat and losing control of his own organization, chose mutual destruction over surrender. It was a decision that made sense only if you understood how completely the dark side had warped his thinking. He believed he was saving the Sith by eliminating the Jedi, even at the cost of every Sith Lord's life. The rationalization was that new Sith could rise from the survivors, that the sacrifice would be remembered and honored, that destroying the Jedi was worth any price. In reality, he was simply giving up. The Brotherhood had failed, and rather than accept that failure, Karan chose to bring everyone down with him. This was the dark side's ultimate betrayal. It promised power, but delivered only self-destruction. Darth Bane understood this in ways Kanan never did. He recognized that the Sith's greatest enemy was not the Jedi but themselves. The Brotherhood's failure was not an aberration but an inevitability, one that would repeat endlessly unless the fundamental approach changed. The Rule of Two was radical specifically because it accepted the dark side's nature rather than fighting it. Ambition could not be eliminated, so channel it into the master versus apprentice dynamic. Competition could not be avoided, so make it productive by ensuring only the strong survived. Betrayal was inevitable, so formalize it as succession rather than treating it as organizational failure. Bane's genius was recognizing that the Sith could not be fixed. They could only be redirected. The contrast with the Jedi was stark. The Jedi Order survived for 25,000 years because their philosophy aligned with how the light side of the Force operated. They could maintain large organizations, pass knowledge across generations, and sustain themselves through collective effort. The Sith, attempting to copy that organizational model, lasted at most a few centuries before self-destructing. But the Rule of Two, embracing the dark side's inherent selfishness and turning it into a feature rather than a bug, endured for 1,000 years and ultimately achieved victory. The Brotherhood's legacy was thus paradoxical. It demonstrated both the potential and the futility of Sith cooperation. It proved that Darksiders could work together effectively in the short term, while simultaneously proving they could never sustain that cooperation indefinitely. The new Sith Wars reshaped the galaxy's political landscape in ways that outlasted the Brotherhood itself. The Ruusan Reformation centralized Republic power, creating the strong executive that Palpatine would later exploit. The Jedi's transformation into a military force during the war established precedents that made their role as generals during the Clone Wars seem natural rather than aberrant. The thought bomb's detonation created a wound in the Force that persisted for thousands of years. Ruusan became a dark side nexus, attracting those sensitive to such things and repelling others. The planet was avoided, its name becoming synonymous with tragedy and hubris. The Jedi's purge of Sith knowledge in the aftermath was both successful and incomplete. They destroyed countless artifacts and texts, erasing techniques and philosophies that would never be recovered. But the most dangerous knowledge survived, preserved by Bane and passed down through the Rule of Two's lineage. In a sense, the Brotherhood's failure created the conditions for the Sith's eventual success. If Kana had won at Ruusan, if the Brotherhood had conquered the Republic, what then? Internal conflict would have resumed immediately. Without an external enemy to unite against, the Sith Lords would have turned on each other and the cycle would have repeated. The Brotherhood would have fractured into competing factions, each claiming to be the true inheritors of Khan's vision. The galaxy would have suffered through decades or centuries of Sith civil wars before some new power arose to challenge them. Instead, Bane's intervention gave the Sith something they had never possessed before, a sustainable model for survival and growth. The Brotherhood of Darkness was not remembered fondly in Sith tradition. Later Darksiders, learning about their history through holocrons passed down the Rule of Two lineage, viewed Khan's organization as a cautionary tale. They represented everything the Sith should not be: numerous, divided, and ultimately self-defeating. Yet, there was also a grudging respect. The Brotherhood had come closer to galactic domination than any Sith force before or since. They had proven that Sith cooperation was possible, even if not sustainable, and their failure had taught the most important lesson of all. The Sith could never win through strength of numbers. They would win through strength of will, concentrated and refined across generations, until a single individual emerged powerful enough to achieve what armies could not. That individual would be Darth Sidious, heir to Bane's lineage, and the culmination of 1,000 years of careful planning. He would succeed where the Brotherhood failed, not because he was stronger than Korriban, though he was, but because he understood the lesson their failure taught. The dark side was a tool, powerful but dangerous. Use it carelessly, share it too freely, and it would consume you. But wield it with precision, concentrate it absolutely, and it could reshape reality itself. The Brotherhood of Darkness had burned bright and fast, a supernova of dark side power that illuminated the galaxy for a brief moment before collapsing into nothing. The Rule of Two would burn slow and cold, an ember hidden in shadow, carefully tended across centuries until the moment came to ignite the galaxy itself. Stand on Ruusan today, millennia after the thought bomb's detonation, and you can still feel it. The wrongness in the Force, a scar that refuses to heal. The valley where 200 souls were simultaneously obliterated remains barren. Nothing grows there. Animals instinctively avoid it. Even the wind seems to move differently, as though reality itself remembers the violence done to it. Visitors report hearing voices in the stillness. Not words exactly, but the emotional residue of final moments. Terror, rage, betrayal. The Force ghosts trapped in that eternal instant have faded over the centuries, their consciousness finally dissolving into the cosmic background, but the echo of their suffering persists. The crater has become a meditation site, though not one sanctioned by any Jedi Council. Darksiders seeking power come here, believing they can draw strength from the concentrated dark side energy. They rarely find what they expect. The thought bomb's remnant is not a wellspring but a warning, a testament to ambition consuming itself. Korriban sleeps beneath its red sun, the valley of the Dark Lords, empty of everything but memory. The massive statues still stand, their features worn smooth by millennia of wind erosion. The tombs, once filled with treasures and ancient knowledge, are hollow shells. Grave robbers and Jedi purges stripped them clean centuries ago. But walk among those ruins at twilight, and you might sense something, not ghosts or Force spirits, but the weight of history itself. These stones witnessed the birth of the Sith philosophy. They absorbed the ambitions of countless Dark Lords. They remember when this valley was the center of galactic power, rather than a forgotten relic on a dead world. The ancient Sith species that once inhabited Korriban are long extinct, their genetic legacy diluted into irrelevance. The red-skinned Force sensitives, who worshipped the Dark Jedi exiles as gods, left no descendants, no continuation of their culture. They became footnotes in history texts, remembered only for being conquered and absorbed by beings claiming superiority. Their temples crumble, their language is forgotten, their gods revealed as mortal and fallible. Yavin 4's jungles have reclaimed the Massassi temples. Vines snake through corridors where Exar Kun once commanded armies. The pyramids that Naga Sado built still stand, massive stone constructions defying time and entropy, but they are empty. The Massassi themselves, mutated through Sith alchemy into eternal guardians, eventually died out when their purpose disappeared. The temples are silent now. Birds nest in alcoves, designed for meditation. Water seeps through cracks in walls that once channeled dark side energy. Nature, patient and inexorable, is slowly digesting the monuments to ambition that scarred its landscape. Exar Kun's spirit, trapped for 4,000 years in these ruins, finally dissipated when Jedi students accidentally released him during the New Republic era. His attempt to possess new bodies and return to power failed, destroyed by the collective strength of Luke Skywalker's academy. The Dark Lord who nearly conquered the galaxy ended as a cautionary tale for children learning about the dangers of pride. On Onderon, Freeden Nad's tomb has been destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed again across the centuries. Every generation believes they have finally eliminated his influence, sealed away his dark side corruption. Every few centuries, someone discovers that influence persists, that destroying physical monuments cannot eliminate ideas that have taken root in cultural memory. The beast riders and city dwellers who once warred under Nad's manipulation have long since reconciled, their conflict revealed as orchestrated rather than inevitable. But the scars remain in their folklore, their stories, their inherited distrust of Force users who promise easy solutions to complex problems. Dromund Kaas, capital of ancient Sith empires, is lost. Not destroyed but genuinely lost. Its location in the unknown regions deleted from nav computers and erased from star charts. Ships occasionally stumble upon it, finding a jungle world where massive ruins hint at vanished grandeur. They rarely stay long. The dark side presence is overwhelming, driving visitors to paranoia and violence. The planet waits, buried in shadow, for someone ambitious or foolish enough to claim it. These places, scattered across the galaxy, are museums of failure. Each one represents a moment when the Sith believed they had found the answer, the perfect strategy for eternal domination. Each one proved them wrong. The thought bomb's detonation was not unique in Sith history, but exemplary. It perfectly encapsulated the cycle that had repeated for 7,000 years. Ambition leads to power. Power leads to overreach. Overreach leads to destruction. Destruction leads to new ambitions rising from the ashes. Lord Khan believed equality among Sith could break this cycle. Darth Bane proved that only accepting the cycle and working within it could achieve sustainable success. Both were correct in their analysis. Both were wrong in believing they had solved the fundamental problem. The dark side cannot be tamed. It can only be endured. Bane's rule of two succeeded for 1,000 years, an impressive achievement by any measure. But it too ultimately failed, when Darth Vader, fulfilling ancient prophecy, destroyed Darth Sidious and brought balance to the Force. The lineage that began with Bane's vision ended with a father choosing his son over his master, love proving stronger than hate. The lesson, repeated across millennia in different forms, remained consistent. The dark side offers power, but demands everything in return. Those who serve it believe they are in control, right up until the moment it consumes them. The Brotherhood of Darkness was merely the largest, most organized version of a mistake made countless times throughout history. They believed their structure, their unity, their sheer numbers could overcome the fundamental flaw in dark side philosophy. They were wrong, as everyone before them had been wrong, as everyone after them would be wrong. Yet beings keep trying, keep believing they will be different, keep thinking they can master what has destroyed every previous attempt. Perhaps that is the dark side's most insidious quality. It whispers that this time will be different, that you are special, stronger than those who came before, that their failures were due to weakness or stupidity, flaws you do not possess. The whisper is always a lie, but it is a seductive lie, one that appeals to the ego's deepest need to believe in its own exceptionalism. Millennia from now, long after the events we have chronicled, someone will discover a Sith holocron. They will activate it, learn the ancient teachings, and believe they have found power the Jedi suppress out of fear. They will fall to the dark side, convinced they are enlightened rather than corrupted. They will gather followers or work alone. They will plan conquest or pursue personal power. They will believe themselves different from all who came before. And they will fail, because the pattern is not a suggestion but a law as fundamental as gravity. The Force seeks balance. When darkness grows strong, light rises to oppose it. When light becomes complacent, darkness finds opportunity. This eternal struggle is not a flaw in the universe, but its essential nature, the dynamic tension that allows change and growth. The Brotherhood understood this intellectually. They studied history, learned from previous failures, and attempted to innovate beyond past limitations. Their mistake was believing understanding could overcome nature. You cannot negotiate with the tides or bargain with the sun. You can only adapt to forces beyond your control or be destroyed by them. The Jedi, for all their flaws and failures, understood this truth. Their philosophy was built around acceptance rather than domination. Flow with the Force rather than attempting to command it. Serve others rather than yourself. Find strength in humility rather than pride. These were not weaknesses, but acknowledgments of reality. The light side rewarded such attitudes because they aligned with how the Force naturally operated. The Sith fought reality and called it strength. As you drift toward sleep, consider the ruins scattered across the galaxy, the empty tombs on Korriban, the scarred valley on Ruusan, the reclaimed temples on Yavin 4, each one a monument to ambition that exceeded wisdom. They are not warnings, because warnings require people willing to heed them. They are simply evidence, proof that power without sustainability is spectacle without substance. The stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance, indifferent to the dramas played out beneath them. Civilizations rise and fall, empires expand and collapse. The Force flows through it all, neither good nor evil, but simply present the fundamental energy binding reality together. The Brotherhood of Darkness believed they could shape that force to their will, could impose order on chaos through strength and unity. They achieved much in the attempt, conquered worlds, developed techniques, pushed the boundaries of what was possible through dark side mastery. And in the end, they destroyed themselves more completely than any enemy could have managed. Their story is not tragic, because tragedy implies nobility in defeat. This was simply inevitable, the natural conclusion of choices made and philosophies embraced. The galaxy turns, time passes. New generations arise with no memory of the new Sith Wars or the Brotherhood that waged them. The lessons are forgotten, ensuring they will be relearned through blood and suffering. Such is the way of things. Such has always been the way of things. Such will always be the way of things. Let the darkness embrace you now. Not as threat, but as rest. Let the weight of 7,000 years of history settle over you like a blanket. Let the voices of the past fade into the quiet hum of eternity. The Brotherhood rose from shadow and returned to shadow. Their ambitions, once galaxy-spanning, now exist only in fragmentary records and half-remembered legends. Their Dark Lords, who believe themselves immortal through the Force, are dust and echoes. But the Force endures. The stars continue their dance. And somewhere in the vastness of space, on worlds we have not yet discovered, the cycle prepares to begin again. Not because we fail to learn, but because the lesson requires experiencing rather than understanding. The thought bomb's crimson light has long since faded. The screaming has finally ceased. The valley sleeps beneath alien stars. And in that sleep, perhaps, there is peace at last. Rest now. Let these ancient tales settle into your dreams. Let the rise and fall of empires become the rhythm of your breathing. Let the eternal struggle between light and dark fade into the background, static of consciousness preparing for sleep. The Brotherhood story is finished. The night is quiet. And tomorrow, when you wake, the galaxy will still be turning, the Force will still be flowing, and life will continue in all its chaotic, beautiful complexity. But for now, in this moment, there is only stillness, only rest, only peace.